Michigan, and places. We don't need it. We'll get the pollution. You know, it's a $1 billion train running downhill already. You got to stop it. And we have about $1 billion in just energy profits shipped out of the state just as profit. And I keep thinking that if we could get some money to start an alternative energy company, it could be very labor controlled. I mean, basically, industry is almost de-unionized. That's 12% union now. I mean, that's our fight. And if people who are in industry aren't scared, they should be, the workers. So to some extent, we got to create an alternative economy, and that strikes me as a good goal. The other thing that could be real useful is to get the data on really the government assumption of the bank liabilities, to use it whenever the companies start crying foul and bring government in. Because you can say, well, this is what you did for the bank, this is what you did to protect capital, and then you cut on this is what you did to protect workers. That type of data strikes me as something you could use to start negotiation.
And we need to remember, I belong to 2 unions. We need to remember that unions at one time in this country had a strong impetus to create worker-owned businesses and did. The Knights of Labor did this. The iron molders, headed by William Silvis, did. There have been other attempts, but there have been several reasons why unions have forgotten this and why we don't learn about it in school or college or any place else. There are obvious reasons, but the only modern day attempt by an international union to create from the ground up a worker-owned business was done by the bricklayers. Now there are people that will say that the bricklayers, being part of the construction trades, are part of the reactionary forces that have kept us in farm intrigues and what have you. These people have made a very serious effort under this present administration of the bricklayers.
I don't want to interrupt you. How about this question though, about how do you find out who's received funding for any of these buyouts or for the acceptance of liability or risk in any of these situations?
Very simple source from the regional Federal Reserve Bank in your region. In Louisiana, I'm sure it's in New Orleans. In New England, it's in Boston. It sits on a handsome chunk of harbor real estate and looks out both towards the city and the city.
Is there a national database that's got any of that in there? So these are all the essentially loan portfolios managed by the individual regional offices.
There's an organization based in Charlotte called the Campaign for Financial Democracy, by Tom Schlesinger, who has got some data based principally on the savings and loan industry. The same principle involves. But when you've got, as New England does, about 113 banks are about ready to close up or have been closed. One a week is closed in Massachusetts for the last year. They would have closed 33 at one time, but they thought that would be too much of a shock to the psyche of the society.
The head of the state AFL is on the Federal Reserve Board for this area. It's Vic Busian. It's out of Atlanta. Up until you came up, you suggested this idea. I could never figure out a way to use him. But they're going to close a couple big savings and loans, and pretty soon and start consolidating that stuff on FERC. And I'm just wondering if we can't use that liability thing to the buying of the liability to save the jobs instead of the debts and create a union in the banks.
Exactly. There are 2 or 3 ESOP banks with employee stock ownership. Now, don't get confused. We work with ESOP, but only if they are going to result in democratic control and 51% or more of the shares are held in trust before the workers.
Is that what an ESOP means, or is it something broader than that?
An ESOP is much broader than that. ESOPs, the overwhelming number of ESOPs that have been created in this country in the last 10 years have been created as a tool for management to consolidate its control over the corporation.
Essentially, they distribute the shares amongst employees, but they still have enough to manage.
Mostly they distribute the shares amongst the working managers. For example, Avis will tell you that they're an employee-owned company and they proclaim that loudly in their advertising. But only managers own the shares of stock, and agents in the local communities or the car washers or the runners, they don't own the shares. The drivers for UPS touts itself as an employee-owned company, but only supervisory personnel and up are allowed to own shares, unless you go out and buy on the open market. It's one of those kinds of companies. So don't get sucked into the idea that an ESOP is going to be the solution. I think the other thing that you need to take into account is that there aren't many governmental agencies that will act on this in what might be regarded as a proactive way. They will act when there's a plant closing. They will help you react to some degree. But JTPA is cynically used to support ongoing businesses, particularly in the poultry industry or in the garment industry, to subsidize already low-wage workers and keep the costs down for the company even more. And there are case after case of JTPA used for that. The early warning system and the WARN system, and that's a joke. Not a single government agency that is closed in Massachusetts has abided by, and there are lots of them that have closed, has abided by the federal legislation that says any company with more than 100 employees has to notify the town and the state 30 days ahead of time, or 60 days ahead of time. So I don't think you turn to government. I think you have to turn to a union in terms of the strength of the union. All of us belong to voluntary organizations and voluntarily tax ourselves to support those organizations, like here in Louisiana, the state union is an organization. That's where I turn. And when we created the strong worker-owned businesses that we've created have come from that kind of support. I found that government always have compromised.
One of the sort of related things to what a lot of people have been talking about is the question of, we've been talking about, earlier we talked a lot about affecting investment decisions of companies, and the biggest kind of investment change would be conversion of a plant to a more environmentally sustainable production output. I'd just like to hear, both from the labor perspective and from your own experience, ideas about, it's a very difficult concept, and it's been hard to make work, particularly in the peace movement, where they've done a lot of work with trying to convert companies. But I'm interested in any insights that anybody has about, or success stories about converting companies, having them make bigger changes, like, for example, they were making CFCs and now they're making something that
That's right.
something that doesn't damage the ozone layer or human health at all. And any ideas about how to really make, about whether it's even possible to make it happen, or where the hopes are to make that happen?
The goal I've got is to get them to not just stop making CFCs, but not to replace them with HCFCs, to use something that does not have HCFC 141B plants. EPA realized that the HCFC was not as protective of the ozone as they first thought, and Allied has scrapped that project. We've just got to get some of the rest of them to realize that some of the alternatives are not as safe as what they're portrayed to be.
You're talking about an issue of control, and control over policy, and control over the determination of technology, the use of technology, and the use of resources, of labor, and and I don't see that there's any way to deal with that unless you control the corporation. And that doesn't necessarily mean just having shareholders resolution. Those are important, but appealing to the goodwill of a corporate executive hasn't gotten us very far.
Well, Sanford, though, you might counter that at all, the notion of good neighbor agreements or working with companies or something at the local level through this information?
Well, I think there are some. I mean, the Shell doll example, they affected which we talked about at the beginning. They affected the investment priorities of the company. So there are a few examples around, but I'm lacking a clear and complete strategy to make that happen. I mean, there is one piece of it that I think is one of the most hopeful things, and that's something that Barry Commoner has been working on developing, and that's shifting government purchasing patterns so that companies will then have the market that they need to sell more environmentally sound products, like moving the government into buying electric cars. And he did a calculation that if the government were to shift half of their buying of vehicles into buying electric vehicles, which would be plausible given the capabilities of electric vehicles right now, that would result in a demand for 3 new electric car plants being built in this country. And then I envision working over the coming years to try to affect, not only create a grassroots movement to force the government to do that, but also to identify where the plants are going to be that are going to have to convert, maybe to keep open some of these General Motors plants or something under those circumstances. And that's a piece of it, but and there are other examples of using government buying power that way. But it's a piece, but it's not going to solve a lot of our problems.
Why do you think that the State Department and the War Department are so investing so much money and so many man hours, most of them are men, in conversion issues in the Soviet Union? I mean, they are spending a lot of our money, sending people from Harvard and Stanford and other places to the Soviet Union, or what used to be the Soviet Union, but particularly the Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, to figure out how to convert their factories. Why is it Robert Strauss is now is our ambassador? They are talking seriously about conversion. We have got an extraordinary, we've forgotten that during the 50s and 60s, people were talking about the military-industrial complex in this country. Why don't we have a public policy debate? It's not just about creating
The same thing in
that's
46
important,
in
creating
Japan.
electric cars that the government buys so many percentages
When I
of.
went rebuilding.
But have an honest-to-God presidential debate or a statewide debate. We have not changed the focus of the debate in this country at all since the Cold War has gone on. And the crucial issues to me is, yes, we can all think of creative, different ways products to be produced, but who controls that production? Who controls that technology? I say, what little bit of experience I had growing up as a stepson of a sharecropper in eastern North Carolina, my stepfather controlled the land and controlled the tools. He was working for somebody else at their direction when they said that, which was usually from sunup to sunset. And I'm suggesting to you that until we can control the factories as workers and as citizens in our own communities that make those three new plants, to make those automobiles, we are still going to be addressing second-class citizenship issues in this country. And, I'm afraid I come in late, dominating y'all's meeting, and I'm sorry I've done that.
Well, I think you did that with real good nature and real good ideas here. They are much more profound and probably longer reaching and will take a longer time. But I don't think any of us want to wait in the interim to deal with certain environmental issues. And I think at least the more limited agenda we had today was to figure out, at least through the use of information and through some of the other legal things that are now available, how we make some progress. You want to jump in here?
One of the things that is being done is similar to some of the good neighbor agreements. We have been able to negotiate with a company down in La Crosse over their water discharge permit. Their permit application was sent out for public comment, and very few comments were received, but the ones that were received were technical in nature. There were hearings requested to enable the public to have input into the process. The DEQ called together the people that had commented on this permit application and the company. We had a meeting at DEQ, and we have been able to negotiate a more protective water discharge permit, and this company is going to take 2 of the chemicals that are on their water permit for discharge that they don't use and it wouldn't be in their discharge. They're going to take it out of the permit. That has worked. We have been able to negotiate, if for lack of a better word, to have stronger permits. But you've got to get in there and do it. The good neighbor agreements may very well work, but we find that we need a combination of good neighbor agreement plus citizens bringing up technical issues regarding their permits. And that has worked quite well.
I think that's exactly one of the key focal points too. The TRI is really only a beginning point to get information to plug into the permit process. And the real question is, how do we target which facilities and which permit applications to go after?
Many as possible.
Now, since we do have limited resources, how do we target them? I've been talking about the same issue in the past week with various folks coming in with a very mechanistic way of going after all these databases, getting ways to start filtering them back and forth, and prioritizing in some way. Now, I don't think anybody's smart enough to say right now what's the best way to go after and target them. Do you have a sense of it? Does anybody have a seat of the pants notion of, if we can get nationals working with local activists in some way, that we can bring in a cadre of lawyers and dig at a local level, how do we target what we want to go after?
Didn't have a question. I mean, the strength of the environmental movement as opposed to the labor movement seems to me is environmental movement rarely targets. They help folk who are already upset, which is what probably the labor movement should do. But so, I mean, disadvantage is when people either win or lose, they go away a lot, but they're moving faster because anybody's got a problem that they try to help. If the packaging of data like that with, if we could get the tax bribe issues on the agenda, and the local emergency planning data on what the hell they're storing, we still need we need a model, and I hate to go back to the co-op model, but something that gets workers involved and community involved in ownership of economic direction. But what we got, if we can put those pieces together, these are the data, these are some of the permitting processes, these are some of the incentive processes, which is tax bribes and stuff like that. And these are some of the, we can bring in, here's the data on the banks to prove that this really is government policy, and here's, if we could get together these packets and launch them through the networks like the environmental movement, or the labor movement, or
Combination of both.
or civil rights movement, whatever we're into. I think the key is not targeting, it's helping. And then you have to figure out an organizational structure to help together. But you're right, what basically is labor and environmental movements tax themselves. And if they're going to pay for it, we've probably got the right target.
I want to disagree with what you said, that what he's saying is a much more profound change than what I'm talking about when I talk about good neighbor agreement. Because I think it's that the good neighbor agreement is like a major step towards community control of the facility, and that's why there's such massive resistance
Yeah, it's like
to
doing
doing it. If you look at this list,
But you're not involving ownership, though. I agree.
well,
with
If you own the liability, you
starting
own
to-
something.
You're starting to affect a lot of management's prerogatives as to what they,
You own the right to sue, you got
things that they believe, that it's their prerogative to control, like information, like opening the door wider and wider to how much information you have about things like the financing of the company. And I'm talking about, when I talk about good neighbor agreements, I'm talking about having the company say, developing commitments on things like job security for the community. So I'm talking about the question of how many years are you committed to stay around in this community? Are you willing to foreclose the option of closing and going to Mexico? And
You're not
having
gonna
that
sign
be
legally
in
binding
some form
contract.
of agreement with the company, and in a binding agreement. I mean, that is eliminating one of the big pieces of control that they had, whether they can up and move.
It may not be legally binding, but by what I've seen and by experience in the environmental movement, if you have got a good neighbor agreement, which will always be publicized that this company signed this agreement, you can make it binding.
De facto, because they don't want to go back on their word and take it.
That's right, and take the
public
heat
use.
of the bad publicity. One of the problems that I see is a lot of citizens as a whole do not understand and realize that they can actually make a difference by getting involved. They're starting to realize it, but we have got to get that word out. We've got to show them where people have made a difference.
But the step that gets it power, I mean, calling a company on their lie is power. But the step that gives it the power that when they lie, you can embarrass them, but if you embarrass them, if you really embarrass them, they'll go away. That's always the threat. I mean, if you really, but if we could figure out a way, maybe through the Constitutional Convention or something, to put these, to give, court rights, and, this is the penalty scale that goes with the good neighbor contract. If you break it, it's going to cost you, $10,000 per job for 10 years in advance or something like that. I mean, if we could put that in, it goes back to the Superfund for Workers type thing, or the Superfund for the Environment type thing.
But to be realistic, do you see that happen?
There are examples.
Not until we start fighting for it.
There are examples of where what people have won in local communities are called clawback provisions. And what those say is, you've been taking subsidies from the community for X number of years, and part of the agreement in taking those subsidies was that you're going to provide us with benefits in terms of jobs. And they've enacted ordinances in communities. This has happened, I believe, in at least a couple of places, where the ordinance says, if you welch on your commitments, you have to pay back the part of the subsidy that's proportional to where you've welched, so that it creates an economic disincentive to the company to leave.
I like that idea.
Yeah,
I'd
and
like
that's
more information on it.
there's a little bit about that in this handbook. I'm going to be writing more about it in the final handbook. I think it's a very important point.
But if you can get that, and I maintain that probably the best avenue might be local government to go through with that. I mean, as opposed to environmental or community groups. And I know we could get in trouble with the government's going to sell us out. But the reason nobody gives a damn about government is because government doesn't have any power. But if the government has the power to win the money back, then people might start voting again.
Question here, what do you do in these kind of economic times when cities bid against each other for the location of a new plant that's coming in? You get tax write-offs that go up for 20 years. You get an industrial piece of ground that's opened up, they'll put in the roads, they'll put in all the sewage lines you need. They'll do everything they can to bring in that plant. And they'll fight each other tooth and nail. And you find this city over in Texas fighting against this one in California and another one in New England. How's a company going to actually get the leverage? I mean, it's a city to get the leverage to put in the clawback.
Well, the clawback obviously works well if you've got a plant
Building
already
economy,
there that you
okay.
want to claw to keep. That's where that works. I think that it's a real big problem. I mean,
With new facilities.
With new facilities, it's a problem. I mean, you can even see if the community also wants to attract new facilities and they have the clawback, maybe the company's not going to want to go into that community once the clawback is there.
Now, is there any way to do
You've got
that?
to use something else.
Is there any way to do that in the aggregate though, so that one city doesn't bid against another?
It has to be federal law, right? A federal law that says that if somebody takes
To
something.
change the strategy.
Yeah, right.
Why not? I mean, most jobs during the 1980s were not created because George Bush promised them. As Pat Buchanan has pointed out, he's created 30,000 jobs, but they've been in Mexico and in Yugoslavia and in Japan. The most job generation comes from local communities, and they come from entrepreneurs in those businesses. And 75% of those small businesses get absolutely no support from local government or from federal government. I would argue that there are enough. The basic idea of the incubator, the job incubators that is in some communities is heading in the right direction. But there's essentially a flaw in that. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to come to your meeting, because this right to know issue. One of the reasons I'm in New Orleans this next week is to learn more about the half and half agreements. Now, I know a good bit about the half and half agreements, but I want to learn more. I want to see if I can't run into some people that were actually part of it.
Now, which of those? I'm not familiar with that.
Well,
30-50 or
this
something?
was an extraordinary event at the turn of the century where black laborers on the docks and white laborers on the docks realized that the shipping companies were pitting them against one another and driving the price of labor down. And moreover, were driving the number of hours that they worked up. These men, and they were all men, got together and they struck a bargain. They agreed that they would hold elections, and they would elect two people, one black and one white, to be head of their union. They didn't call it a union. They in effect were a union, but because of the laws and the reaction against unions, they called themselves a protective association, and at least initially. And they had an agreement that no negotiations for wages, hours, or working conditions, which are the crucial things to us as workers, and we should add now, the environment in our communities, would be done unless there were two people negotiating, one black and one white. And third, they agreed that there would be no contract approved where in a meeting where there were not equal numbers of blacks and whites attending.
So is the model here that labor environment?
Labor,
Has to move together.
environment, women get together, blacks, and they have not just half and half, but they have whatever kind of proportion that you want to talk about. But you make sure that the community and workers and environmental groups and whatever else that you want to include. Like, for example, in the chicken industry where women are getting pulled over hair.
Plucked.
And in some instances, sexually violated. I can take you to acquaintances that have been sexually violated in order to maintain their job on these horrible poultry lines. I say that the half and half agreement, that history in New Orleans, is instructive for us.
Obviously, if you look at the options, obviously, is community environment, anything else, but there's actually, say, JEDCO or the economic development companies, which claim they're here to build jobs, here to build companies, and have half, whatever runs is half labor, half management, somehow. But there are functioning half and half committees, and it's the pension funds, where if you know 6 people on the committee, 3 are going to be management, 3 labor. If one of the guys doesn't show up, one of the guys on the other side has to sit out. So
And
the
the
model
3 of them-
exists.
And the 6 of them elect the chair.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of examples. There's a small department in the Department of Labor, a small office in the Department of Labor, which is promoting joint labor management cooperation. And I fear, because I know a lot of them, that it's a way to co-opt labor's militancy. But if this is something that the community organizes in one of these startup situations or plant bringing cleaning that the city government is going on, and you make certain that the environmentalists are at the table, labor's at the table, and it's going to be a predominantly woman employee operation, women are at the table, and that you force city government or state government or county government or in your case parish government to strike that into the contractual agreement.
Well, it sounds like, though, even more generically, though, that the union, by taking on a very overt environmental activism role through things like republicizing TRI and toxic release data, by publicizing what's going on with permitting, by publicizing the real effects upon the general community, and taking a leadership role in environmental activism groups as well, has got an ability to forge that kind of linkage, and where it can play both ways. It gathers greater legitimacy in the eyes of the general public, and more service, and potentially then a way to get these other mechanisms for job owning or negotiating or gaining more power in the contract negotiations as well. Is that a real conclusion?
Don't forget what he said at the very outset of our little dialogue we've had since I started running my mouth too much. Labor unions, organized labor unions are down at less than 12%. And in most of the part of the world that I've lived in, most of my life, labor unions don't even cast a shadow. You know, I'm delighted when there is one around, but we have got to figure out not only how to shake hands with labor, if we're going to be environmentalists, and hope that labor will reach back, but we've also got to figure out how to do this without when there's no labor around. I mean, there's always going to be a worker, but there may not be an organized worker. It's up to the environmental movement, and the environmental movement has a great opportunity, in fact, a challenge to do this.
I think most of us will agree with you on that, which is maybe part of the rationale for why we're here today as well. I can see by the clock, though, we're past the time we thought we were going to wrap this up. I don't know if everybody's starved, tired, burned out. We discussed it all, but maybe we should at least give everybody a chance, if you want, to go around and make a last comment, try to wrap up yourself, or urge somebody on to do something else. You want to?
Well, I've heard a lot of new ideas. I've seen different ways people are looking at things, and this idea of democracy, you know, at its grassroots, at its best. You know, I've never really thought too much about it. I thought of it, but never really thought of it in a working possibility, you know. And I can see where it is something worthwhile to think about. But anyway, as a general, there's a lot of good ideas that I've gathered up today. Met a lot of nice people too.
I know our cameraman hasn't said anything tonight. You sort of got pushed out of it. You want to give it a try? Get yourself on the picture once.
No, that's okay. I don't photograph well. Just a lot to take in at once, for sure, you know. But you keep on coming to these meetings time and time again. The picture gets to be more and more focused. But you can only do so much, you know. So that's it.
Couple of weapons, which was what I came for, so I'm very, very happy. I got a feeling, I have a better picture of the pie in the sky now. I'm still not quite sure how to get to the pie. But, you know, a better picture is valuable.
Sure.
Nothing much to add. First time in Louisiana, I'm really interested by the context here of just the concentration of chemical plants, worker concerns about health and safety, environmental citizen groups organizing, issues around environmental racism, people of color. It's just a fascinating breeding ground for ideas and new strategies. So I'm glad to hear people talking about them. I hope that we can share them with other people around the U.S. through, getting reports like Sandra's writing or newsletters that we all do, circulating around. So glad to help think ways to do that. Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. I feel that, I learn something every time I come to the table with people like this, which is encouraging, and it's exciting to hear success stories. I think it's encouraging for us to find that some of the strategies that we're incorporating into our work is useful and working and is reinforced when folks like you come here and encourage us with your writings, and we know that we can make a difference if we stick together. And I think the bridge between worker and environmentalist is so important. And at this time, I feel is still very fragile, even though we worked really hard during the BASF lockout with our union brothers and sisters, and it was very important and very historical. But I'd like this meeting reinforces to me that we need to continue our commitment and make it even stronger, because we feel the workers are the first that are exposed in the community, and it's just very important to be vocal for them and with them. And I guess that's about it. So it's always encouraging to hear all these good ideas.
It's very strange how alike we think. Because one of the things that I was going to say is that we've got to bring more workers, whether they are union or non-union, into the environmental movement and show them that we are not out after their jobs. We're trying to make their jobs safer so the communities will be safer. And we've got to keep plugging along. Things are getting better. They're not as bad in Louisiana as they have been in the past, and that's only come from citizens and workers working together to accomplish that. And it's going to be a lot harder now.
Challenge of government. Yes.
Actually, never mind. That's your political commentary. Mine is the opposite. We had a governor who acknowledged the environment but didn't acknowledge labor, and I still think if you can get them to acknowledge labor, we have a chance to beat up labor and get labor to acknowledge the environment. It's easier to change Blake's mind than the governor's.
Well, the reason I say it's going to be harder is we've got to watch a lot more things a lot closer as far as permitting and the environment.
Oh, yeah.
But it's sometimes easier strategy-wise when you don't have a friend in office.
Yeah.
When you've had a friend, a lot of our folks had great difficulty being critical and even took it on a personal level, particularly folks such as Pam who believe more in consensus building and negotiation. And so now that we have more of a vocal, appears to be making anti-environmental policies already. I think more folks will come forward, so I think we'll be even stronger maybe, Bill.
Yeah, we have the opposite problem.
I guess the other thing that I would
You
add,
just go on forever about that.
yeah, I guess the other thing that I would add is that we've got to have real dialogue between the environmental community, the workers, and the plants. Not the dog and pony show and their community relations, but real dialogue. That's the only way to make change.
I think, and a lot of credit goes to Bill Timmick for starting the Injured Workers Union here in Louisiana. It's not, Louisiana's the first state that's had it, and it's 13 or 14 other states have already inquired about how we've gone about it and how we're structuring it and what we're doing, and are very interested. 9% of the U.S. workforce next year will either be injured or have some type of work-related disease happen to them. And these people are completely unaware of the situation that they're going to fall into if they're injured. So as the environmental group and the labor unions and the Injured Workers Union, I think we can bridge in there, you know, to get the cooperation to where the union people will understand what the environmentalists are doing, and then when somebody gets a little bit hurt or something, if anybody in here cares to tell them, there's a Injured Workers Union here in the state that we can give them some help and some support.
It's a wonderful organization. I can't say enough good things about you and Bill and Alan and all the folks who are making it happen. It's very important.
It's really, really.
It's going to be a model for other states. I really feel.
I was hurt.
So you should be proud of yourselves.
I was hurt a year and a half ago, and I was hurt real bad chemically, and for 4 or 5 months, you know, I was really depressed. But then when I found out about the Injured Workers Union and got involved in it, and found out that I wasn't the only one, that there were other people out there that were hurting and suffering, and why, you know, and the fellowship that we started and the project we got involved in gave us things to do, and so I'm proud of Bill and Alan and them too.
Try something?
Well, I just want to say that I think in terms of environmental labor coalition building and working to get things done, I think Louisiana is probably the hotspot in the country. Some of my thoughts after being here for 2 weeks is that I'm amazed at the real progressive strain that runs through this state, and citizens of all parts of it. Talking to folks on the phone, I imagine I've talked to some of the people here on the phone, and hopefully I can meet them personally afterwards here. As a person that's spent most of my adult life as a union organizer, I'm acutely aware of how often the bridge between the environmental movement and the labor movement is constantly being bombed by corporate America, and I think that we need to keep that in mind.
She's waiting.
That was very much like that 50-50 thing he was talking about, wasn't it? Where they pitted each other against each other. When he was talking about they pitted the whites against the blacks, and what he was talking about,
right.
pitting the
Sure.
workers against the environmentalists.
Fear and ignorance on, you know, just fueling things that aren't true lies.
I'm sorry.
It's very hard to digest all of the things that people have said to me in this. I think that the questions of goals and tactics that you choose to achieve the goals that you are trying to reach are endlessly fascinating, and who works with whom and how you create those connections. I feel like a lot of questions were raised for me today, and I'm thankful for doing that, to the people that came for coming in. But
course.
I agree with a lot of the things that people have said, and in addition to a lot of the comments that I heard just now, I'd like to say for myself on a personal level, it was a very informative meeting. Quite happy I drove the distance to come here.
Where'd you come from, by the way?
Corona, but I have a daughter living in Baton Rouge, so
Okay.
I'm about 80 miles from Baton Rouge. And I think Louisiana has made some notable progress where pollution is concerned. And with the new governor in his position, I would certainly hope that it will not really hinder our progress. And I think we're kind of getting the message out in our area that we're not out to get anybody's jobs. And hopefully we can continue to proceed with that. And because our main goal is a clean and safe environment, whether it's in the workplace or for regular individuals who are not involved because they're affected. So we're very concerned.
I'm really sorry I missed the first part of the meeting because I benefited a lot from the last discussion. I have been always interested most in the economic underpinnings of problems with corporate America and environmental problems, and I think that the new frontier for environmentalism here and probably everywhere in the country is to understand all that better. We need to have a lot more meetings, strategy meetings like this in this state, and conventions and whatever, bringing together the unions and environmentalists, because on both sides, people don't understand the others. I've had varied experiences with unions here. At the Environmental Law Clinic where I work, we've benefited a lot from working with the very progressive union local in this area, from information that's specific and, the context there has been very, very helpful. And we've beat the company a number of times now, working with the community there, but only because the union has been so helpful. In other parts of the state, OCAW locals have not been progressive at all. In fact, the kind of intimidation and worker blackmail that's gone on has been made things really difficult for everybody involved. And it's not the workers' fault. It's not the environmentalists' fault. It's a problem with lack of communication. The fact that the company line has been overwhelming for too long. We've won in a number of cases despite that, and the workers have come to understand that they didn't lose their jobs after all. So, over time, sometimes things get better despite a really bad situation anyway, but it's difficult, and especially when there's not most of the state is right through the state. Environmentalists really don't have very much information to go on. So, we need help. Any national groups that want to come down anytime to help on specific cases are welcome. Because I think it's the new frontier.
Nice to throw it out. I'm not sure how to tie this together. The New Orleans AFL-CIO, the one that represents Greater New Orleans, voted not to re-elect themselves for at least a month, pending figuring out what they want to do. Now, they're going to end up re-electing themselves, and they're still not going to know what to do. But the opening is starting to come. I mean, the big fear was if Governor Edwards got elected, the AFL would go disappear and just do what they did before because they trusted Governor Edwards. Well, New Orleans is the biggest AFL in the state, and they just said, that's not good enough. So, and that was the executive board. That's the biggies, the guys I can't go to the meeting with. I'm not sure that we can't figure out a way to start a dialogue, even if it won't click in this year. But I'm sure we can do the same thing in Baton Rouge, because the AFL is more progressive, but the AFL there doesn't have the control over the locals. But that's a different story. But if we got New Orleans and Baton Rouge, and Lake Charles is open, I think
Lafayette's opening up.
Lafayette's opening up.
Yeah.
I think there's some real openings now based on the confusion. And the confusion is based in reality. So be tolerant, because the union movement's screwed up too. But it's open.
I just thank you all very much for your patience with me saying something. You all for large unit at the end of the meeting, already going in. I'd like to share one thing, however, that is just, to me, is just a stunning revelation about what happens when we don't have control over our work, and we have no control over wages and government agreements inappropriately. 4 years between 1940 and 1945, 88,000 workers were killed, and 11 million were injured. That's 11 times the number of casualties that America suffered at war. And that was when workers were not allowed to strike, and when they were not allowed to argue for wage increases. And immediately after the war, there was the largest wave of strikes, wildcat strikes in this country's history since 1929, here in the South, when a wave called the Great Wave of Strikes took place. People in rayon factories up in Elizabethton, Tennessee, 5,000, without a union's help, walked off the jobs, protesting in 1929 the damage that those jobs were doing to their health, exploitation that they were doing, the damage those rayon factories were creating to their communities. Not since 1929 have there been such a wave of strikes as there were after the war. And Charles Wilson, who had been the vice chairman of the War Production Board and who was the president of General Electric, said at the end, in the midst of all these strikes, and at the end of the war, there were two challenges facing America: Russia abroad, labor at home. And I would argue that rather Russia abroad is all over. I was on a bus coming down here with a Marine that served 23 years from Lake Charles. He was a cold warrior to his heart, he said. He said, that was a fiction. I was lied to by my brother. There's a guy who had a flag in his lapel on the bus. He said this. Well, not everybody believes that the Cold War is over, but I think we shouldn't allow citizens, we should not allow government at any level to continue supporting capitalists the way they have. I'm talking about capitalists now. Capitalists the way they have, and ignoring labor and ignoring violence. I just think what you're doing is fine. I'm delighted that this meeting is here, and I'm sorry I didn't get some other things. Imagine how much I could have said.
I'm really glad that you came here. I think you were an essential addition to the whole texture of how the meeting evolved. So that was really an important part for me. When I was putting together my comments for this meeting, and when I've been drafting this handbook, I've been really struck as much by how much I don't know and how much we all don't know about the strategy as how much we do. For example, when it comes to citizens working with workers, I got this measly list. These are all important things, but I look at this list and I think, this is all that anybody can tell me about how to go about doing this? You know, I've been talking with a lot of people about it, and this is basically what it's come down to. And I want to invite you to think about it and think about other things that ought to be on this list so that this can be expanded as a tool. Now, you said I'm coming away with sort of the pie in the sky picture, and I don't know sort of the details of how we get there. I think that in some of the other materials that I put together, some of the step-by-step of how people muddle through and go through this process is in there, and I think that we did the business that we needed to do in at least getting a much better idea about the pie in the sky. I thought about coming in here, and the first thing I was going to do was read this poem, and I'm going to end by reading this because what you've done for me, you talk about questions, and the thing to me is that this process is a process of questions and of carrying those questions, and I think that what this process has done for me, this meeting has made me much more passionate about the questions that I have to carry in taking this process forward and try to instill in people. And the poem is one by Rilke that I've been thinking a lot about lately. It says, try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms or books that are written in a foreign tongue. The point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live your way some distant day into the answers. So thanks.
Am I left on the list here? That's great. Well, it's a big difference coming down here than sitting in Washington. You know, a nice cozy little office, and being a technician, thinking about data coming out of the federal government, how you put these pieces together. And it's really enlightening and enlivening to come down because you get a sense of the reality, maybe some way to plug in. I'll definitely walk away from this with a better sense of organizations and people, and maybe why it makes a difference. How you have to stimulate people to do things. And if you can fit in some nice way, support them a little bit, of course it matters. I know I walked away with one nice little technical thing that might make a difference. You think about a piece of information to put together, and I always thought OSHA probably fit in here at some place, but it finally occurs to me we should probably get worker injuries in it, and with TRI numbers, that there's probably some very simple correlations there. Oh, yes?
Yeah, it's about Eric. I'm trying to find money to get it from Louisiana, somewhere less than $500. But they tapped the entire OSHA database, and they're starting to pull the stuff out. I don't know how sophisticated the stuff is yet.
Well, if there's a way to get the data, I think we'd commit to putting it up with the TRI data, and also look at to see what kind of connections there is between those two things. So that's one little simple thing that I think I can take back with me. But I think, like some other people, it revitalized the notion of what it means on a political level and on a local level to do things. I'm not sure that I'm reinforced the whole program with all this government data is going to make a big difference, but we have a little more sense in some very basic ways it makes a difference. If we can fight on the permits, and if we can make some sort of relationship between people. So I can only thank you all for having a chance to